And now I'll turn it over to Laura. Thanks.
Okay. Now, can everyone see me today?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, oh, good. I'm not sure that's a joy, but, at least today that's what's happening. If it gets noisy here, I'm doing this from home because I have an appointment at a library at 12:30. That's more than an hour from Lawrence. So anyway, let's start with the Tale of Two Budgets, Part 2. I wanted to start by thanking all of you. I haven't had a class ever that has been so attentive to the material and to the homework assignments. You're to be commended. Well done. Don't panic. You didn't have to have it done by today. You really don't have to have it done by the end of May, but this one is one of those where you're going to need it sooner. So as you work on this, don't hesitate to call or email or, contact me through Apple. Works better to just email. I've been going through your homework very slowly but steadily, and I'm impressed. I would just want to share that. At the end here, I'm going to email out the Excel spreadsheets and some of the examples of timelines, because what's up in Apple has been there for a while and is apparently corrupted, and I need to take it down and put it back up. But I'll just send it out in email too, so you can see some of the formats. Anyway, on with the show. So we're going to get into, last time we spent a lot of time kind of talking about the fact that your entity, be that a city, a township, a county, or a district, and district is always the exception, that we spent a lot of time last time talking about how you have an entire budget, but they really are only interested usually in a piece of that budget. So now I'm going to take you back and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the whole budget. Timelines, you've all sent me various dates, and I'm really interested in when you plan to do these things. And I realize we're in May already, so that makes it sort of awkward. But you can get, if your city or township does not give you a breakout of the money they give you, they can A, get it for you, or B, if they're not interested or too busy at this point in time to get it for you, you can ask for it from the county. Because when the county sends the money to your entity, it breaks it out. So much ad valorem tax, so much motor vehicle tax, so much watercraft tax, it's all broken out. And so if you're not getting that breakout every month, that would be something to work on with your city or township. Please give me the breakout of what kinds of money I'm getting in one lump sum here. And then I'm going to tell you to use November's certified valuation. If you remember last year, we talked about the budget process starts with an estimated valuation, and the city clerk then the county actually clerk by November 1st has a final property valuation. And I had you get those things off of your state budget forms. And you saw that sometimes often that valuation changes. So the mills that you thought you were getting in August are not the same as the mills that you're actually going to be using for January. It's the same dollars. It's this little green box off in the blue field here. That's where the county clerk writes in the new valuation on your budget certificate page. If the certificate page you found didn't have that, you need to call and ask what that November 1 valuation was. But that's where I'm talking about where that valuation sits. For district libraries, and you're going to use me as I kind of try to address those that are. You're very similar in many ways, but districts have special responsibilities. Your tax breakout will come from the county. And very often, I'm guessing, you get a breakout of your money when you get it. Your timeline is longer than the city or township libraries because really you don't have any, you present to your membership at a budget hearing. You don't have to have it put together and then give it to the city on a timeline often before the end of July. So your timelines are a little different. That's the first difference you're going to have. This is true for all libraries. The publication of that budget, the notice of hearing, goes in the paper by August 5th. It can be earlier than August 5th. It shouldn't be later than August 5th. Sometimes it is, but it's meant to be done by August 5th. You hold a budget hearing 10 days after, no sooner than 10 days after the publication of the information in the paper. And then after the budget's approved at this budget hearing, then you would certify it to the county. You would take it to the county 10 days after the budget hearing. Now, I'm really honestly not sure why that 10 days afterwards is in the statute, but it is. But I've found that most county clerks don't care if you take it in the day after. But talk with your clerk about when you should bring it in if you're a district library. City and township libraries, the city or township will be doing these pieces. But you just need to know when to expect to see that notice of hearing in the paper. Now, I've had a lot of questions about carryover. And we're going to go over this because this is an important thing to understand. Carryover also equates to the money you have in the bank. You're a cash entity for the most part, almost all of you. So you all have a general fund. Some of you have an employee benefit fund, and some of you have a capital improvement fund. But you all have a capital improvement fund is something that's set aside. It's not part of the carryover for the general fund. Employee benefit money stays to itself, so it has its own carryover. So if you have all three of these funds, you will have a beginning balance in all three of them. If you only have one general fund, you're still going to have a beginning balance. How much money do you have in the bank? That includes the checking account, any savings accounts that are general fund money, any CDs that you might have for long-term savings that are not designated capital improvement fund money. Some of you do have a separate state aid bank account. If you have endowments or gifts, those are really sort of show up as a separate sub-account, especially if they're restricted. Now, I've really given you even more description down here. If you have petty cash that you keep in the drawer, you add that to your total. So if I had a checking account and a savings account and petty cash, I would add those three together, the beginning balance as of January 1. That's your carryover. I have an example here I went through and created for you. The carryover that the Reality Public Library had at the end of the year, you know, it's the same thing. December 31st, 2016 and January 1, 2017, it's the same amount of money. $7,000. They had $7,000 in the bank. They estimated, this is them planning on their 2017 budget, so they estimated their incomes in these other various areas. The important thing to know is the last number that you will fill in is the line that says ad valorem tax. Save that one, leave it blank until the last thing. So fill in those other numbers. State aid, if I were you, I would probably at least reduce it 25% from what you got this year. In fact, I personally would cut it in half or less. I would have zero, actually. If you can get by on your budget with putting zero there, I would, because if you get more than that, you can spend it. But we're really hoping that we have state aid for the next fiscal year. It's sort of questionable. E-rate, you need to take it down a little bit, maybe 20%, because the phone, the amount that you're getting reimbursed for your phones is declining. I think we're into the third year of a 5-year decline on the phone reimbursement. So it'd be a good idea to guess maybe about 20 to 25% less E-rate than you had this year, or that you got in 2015. Memorials and book sales and fines and fees, I wouldn't estimate high. I would, if you have a fair guess, I would put that down, but I wouldn't estimate high. Now, back into that center section here. So you're leaving ad valorem blank. And what I recommend you do, just because you have no way of getting the numbers quickly, a district probably will have these numbers, by the way. The delinquent tax, motor vehicle, wrecked vehicle, 16-20-ton truck, commercial vehicle, and I see I left out one here. There's watercraft. All of those numbers, why don't you just use what your city used last year? Now, I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. The key here is you had $7,000 in the bank in a variety of accounts to start the year. You're estimating that because you're guessing right now what you'll have at the end of 2016. Now, I'm putting in my best guess of what I think I'm going to have of sources of income. And these are just examples. If I left one out that you have, by all means, use it. So at the end, for 2017, Reality Public Library is estimating they're going to have $88,587 to spend because they put a dollar amount in the ad valorem. And I'll show you why they did that. But you're going to have a total at first without ad valorem. So this is not totally done when you're starting your budget process. You'll go up and plug that number in ad valorem as the last thing you do to make this work. Now, here's what a budget page looks like. And we talked about this last time we met on the 11th. And you'll notice up at the top, you'll see over in the far right-hand corner, right-hand column, motor vehicle, delinquent, 16-20 commercial, and watercraft. You'll see numbers there. Those are the numbers I'm saying to plug into the 2017 budget just for an estimate, because you should plan on something. If you don't, you're going to try to levy way too much property tax. So back to this. So those are those numbers that sit down in here. If you notice, they put it at 88,587. Here's why. So total available cash was 88,587. They sat down and figured out their expenses for 2017. An estimate of salaries, and you don't have to determine the exact salaries. Know what your total is in 2016, and maybe increase it by 2%, that grand total. So you don't have to sit here right now and decide that Mary Jane's going to get 20-cent raise and Ethel's going to get 10 cents and Patty's going to get a dime raise. You don't have to do that now. Work off the big picture. Take the total and multiply it by like 1.02, and then you're factoring in a 2% raise for people. And whatever, if it doesn't work out exactly that way, that money can be spent on other things. You have to figure your payroll taxes while you're doing these things. And then you have all those other things that you need to be including in your budget. And there again, this is just the list for Reality Public Library. This is not the be-all, end-all list. Your normal expenses are what's important here. So the total expenses that they were anticipating was $83,896. And they wanted to have, they started the year before with $7,000. But they're trying to keep their mill levy close to the same, or their tax dollars from last year. I know how this goes, and it's not a good time to go for a gigantic increase. So what they did was decide to drop their carryover slightly, and to have carryover of $4,691, they knew that they were going to need that $57,000 in ad valorem tax. It's an algebra problem in some ways. It's a math thing. Figure those expenses for your income except for property tax or ad valorem, and then see how much ad valorem you need to make it work. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so that Reality Public Library was an example of a library that only had one type of fund. We're going to go back to the OCPL budget, and if you notice, it has three types of funds: general, employee benefit, and capital improvement. Now, they split their general fund when they do their budget between general other money and general tax money, because their city only wants to know their tax income. But you notice they have a cash balance as of January 1. That's carryover. And they plan on having carryover at the end of the year. Here's the expenditures. And they're planning on $17,191 total carryover in all funds, general and employee benefit. That doesn't include the totals of capital improvement, because capital improvement is outside of the city's control. There's no levy attached to it. Okay, so here it is all on one page. It gives you an idea of when I'm talking budget planning, you're plugging in numbers. You have that starting balance. You're doing cash flow right now. You're guessing how, this is the rub the crystal ball. You're reading the future. You didn't know you were so powerful, did you? So you're trying to determine how much money am I going to have at the end of the year. And that means looking at what money you spent between, this period of time and the end of the year last year, and seeing if you can think of anything else, and how is the income looking? Are you getting as much as you thought you would? This is that kind of questioning that you're doing. So that's how, what I'm talking about and what I've kind of put together for you in a sheet. If it's not how you want to do it in a Word doc, but you still need those elements in there. a beginning balance, your anticipated income, how much that is totaled. Then you go down to your expenses and you figure out what your expenses are going to be, and you subtract those expenses from that income and beginning balance. And you can't do a zero budget, or you don't eat the next January. You really need to try to allow for a month at a minimum of income, you know, in the bank left over, so that you have something to pay bills with and people with the following January. That's why you have carryover, because you don't get your tax income, most of you, until February, and some of you not until March. So you've got to have something to go on. Now, state budget forms. The questions you have to ask are, do they want all your revenue sources? How detailed do they want the expenditures to be? And in what format do they want the information presented? And most of all, who is they? Do you have to go do this with your city clerk or city manager? Do they expect you to do it with them first and then bring a presentation to the entire council? On the trustee, if you're a township, do you only work with the trustee that's on your board? Do you go to a township meeting? When they, if they only want a grand total dollar amount, what you're giving them is the ad valorem tax. And then I would say the other taxes. What I would tell them is, I need X amount of property tax, and I based that on receiving X amount of the motor vehicle and other associated taxes. So if I were getting $7,000 of motor vehicle and other taxes, and I needed 52 of property tax, I'd say I need 59,000 in taxes, approximately 7,000 based on last year of motor vehicle, and this much of property tax. They may not care to know what you're going to use it for. I think it's a good idea to tell them. So I think you always start with paying for your people first. Your tax dollars should pay for the people that make the place go for the community. So you need to make sure they know just exactly how much of the employee's salary and benefits is paid by the taxes. And hopefully it's 100%. If it's not, that's a goal. You should at least have those two things paid for by your tax dollars. As I told you before, if you go back and look at Osage City with those coding things, they had insurance and some other things, and they talked about those when they went to presentation. So start with, who do I have to give this to? What time, in what time frame do they want it? And how much detail do they want to have? And if they want it to go to the council, do I have the board chair and the board prepared to all go, and they need to be the ones that present it, because they are your employer. Now, I've given you the links for the different pieces of the state budget forms, and you should go out and roam these pieces of information. I know you don't have a lot of time, but over the years, you need to understand how the city or the township is trying to put your information together and what they have to have. Now, that state budget form has a nice red tab on it. You should go out on this bottom link down here and look and pick any one of them and download it. And you're going to see a red tab that says library on it. And this is the one that the state library uses to determine if you qualify for state aid. for those of you that are part of the Northeast Kansas Library System, if you don't qualify for state aid, we're going to have discussions about your system grant, because part of our accreditation says you must qualify for state aid. So go out and look at those forms. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions. We'll walk through some of this in detail as we go. Remember that certificate page? This one didn't have anything filled out on it. Amy's that I used from Effingham, her county clerk, was good and filled all that information out. So if, yeah, I see you dancing over there. If your county clerk doesn't have that information, you're going to be having a conversation with them. This is a library page. And remember, we talked about the detail is in the taxes over for what the library wants for money. They just called it expenditures. So that's my point, is that they aren't as detailed as you are. Now, if you have an employee benefit page, this is what it's going to look like. Most of them don't get motor vehicle money for employee benefits. They use it all in the general fund. And it's, you have to levy for the benefits you need to have paid. If you have an employee benefit fund, and a district ought to have an employee benefit fund, because the only people that have to approve it are your board. And I would recommend you do have an employee benefit fund. If you don't, talk to me later. We can talk about that. So if you're, this is what goes in the newspaper, just a reminder, this library has both funds, a general fund and an employee benefit fund. And you can see the information that was put in. It doesn't, that's stuff that hasn't changed in 20 years, this kind of thing. However, what changed in 2013 or 2014 was an attempt, the first shot over the bow on limiting the taxes for a city or a township or a county, is that the legislature said that they shouldn't increase the budget more than the rate of inflation for the last fully completed year. So for the 2017 budget, the rate of inflation that we're using on these budget forms is 0.0125%. So you have to add 2 zeros in. So if you're going to take a multiplier, it's 0.000125, because you have to add 2 decimal places for the percentage. It's extremely low, extremely low. So basically what that means is if the city or the township or the county has to raise their taxes much more than virtually what they did last year, and this is dollars, then they have to, this year, they have to put a notice in the paper that says we raised our taxes more than 0.0125%. And it passed by a vote of whatever to whatever. This is the last year we'll be doing this. Next year, you will have a tax lid in place for your entity, but we anticipate libraries being exempted from it. But right now, we haven't gotten the final regulations on that issued. I'll know more after I attend some budget workshops in June, and I'll put out stuff for the Apple group as time goes over this year. So what we're learning today is really the last year this is going to be in place, but you have to know these rules for right now. So if you'd allow me just a few minutes with the district libraries. The library districts have no outside support. If there was a catastrophe and their heating and air conditioning blew up, they have to have funding to support it. which is why it's very important for them to have a capital improvement fund, a legally established capital improvement fund, because they have no other support. Your city or township may not be wanting to raise your mill levy very much, but they are there usually when you have some extraordinary issues.
So Laura, there's a question. So we have to tell them that we're raising taxes plus the public notice?
You won't have to. Your city or township will. If you're a district, you will. What that notice says, if you download a workbook and you go to the very end, there are some samples of notices. And what those notices say is like the Linwood Library District number 1 increase their budget more than 0.0125%. The budget passed 9-2. It's a little bitty notice, and that's all you have to put in the paper. And there is no other process after that. So if at your budget hearing you decide to, now for cities and townships, they're giving their piece of the budget to the city to put in their budgets. So when the city or township approves their budget, they will have to put that notice in if they increase more than that. I'm just telling you that in a tight budget year, it's a good idea to have a tight budget. It's a really important time not to alienate your taxing entity, if at all possible. Back to the district, districts levy directly. They do not levy through another agency. They have to put their own notice in the paper. They have to have their own hearing, and they have to give their information to their county clerk. You are, however, the sole approval for an employee benefit fund, so if you are a district entity, you should have one. Here's the budget authority for districts, which is different than the ones for the public libraries, the city and townships. So what a district needs, they need to go through this same process of what can we do away with, what should we increase, how are our costs and income compared to next year, do that cash flow analysis. And that sounds really fancy, but it's your best guess of how much money you're going to have left at the end of the year. That's what you're trying to do. Really think about that next year. What are we going to do in terms of funding? This is no different than what a city or township does. Something that might help is, and this can be done for a regular public library too, is if you have so you could put 2016 in one column, and you could put 2017 in the next, and then show a % change so the board is looking at what we're doing now, what we'll do next year. I like this kind of format very much for your board, for their planning process. It's not required, but it's not hard. If you want help doing that, I'm sure anyone in your system office could help you do it. If you can't get a hold of them, I'd be glad to send you a template. Here's another this is almost something you could do on a piece of paper. On a Word document if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to be usable for you. In that other one, if you notice, benefits had 3 stars or 4, and here's the total for where that came from. Remember, when you're planning benefits, it's the library half of Social Security and Medicare. You have Kansas unemployment tax that you pay. You probably will have workers' compensation tax, health insurance, or other benefits if you have them. But at the very base, you're going to have those first 4. So this is, there again, here's income. The important thing to know here is if you wanted to do it in a Word document, it works. Just understand what you're doing. And the key there is creating the budget is just the first step. You have to do the reporting afterwards. So how do I report to my board based on this budget? And that'll be some of those forms I'll send out as samples. That really kind of gets into the purview. You know, you have to think about, how do I show my board, here's what we thought we were going to get, and here's what we're getting, and what should we, does it have an impact on what we need to spend or can spend for the year? You have to track it all the way through. So, district budget creation timeline. I've walked through this for you. You have annual meetings in March. That's a good time for you to have an annual report for the prior year, something to give the people that come to the annual meeting. When you get your budget approved, when you have your budget hearing in August, that's another time to go back and review those materials. A lot of other entities just have their budget approval in the spring, and then they go back at the end of the year, as do districts in November and December, and finally approve internally what that budget is going to be for the next year. I put this in here just so you know. These are some definitions, what a mill is. And remember, that's on the property's appraised tax value. So if I have a $167,000 house, its appraised tax value is nowhere near that high. Get your tax statement out and look at that appraised tax value of your property. That's the number they use when they multiply it by 0.001. Property tax is also known as ad valorem tax. And when I talked about assessed valuation, to start this budget process, you get estimates of value in July, and a final value, assessed valuation, is determined in November. So you can get your nice little tax bills that are due in December. Here's an example of, if you had, it tells you, it used to have a resolution required. It isn't required anymore. Green there again is that finally approved assessed valuation. Now, this is an example of the same sort. It's just, you see how they have different things. They're telling people different things. In their city wants to know other things. This was Leavenworth. They had much more detail down in the bottom. A district library is going to have much more detail in the top and the bottom, because there's no reason for a district library not to show all their income and all their expense. They may not use every single budget line. You may have 10 or 12 line items or 20, and they are lumping this up into program areas, but they're showing all their expense. This is an older Linwood library example. Linwood is a district library. You'll notice that they have on there, this is their employee benefit fund. They didn't detail it out, but they totaled it, and they know what it is here. District libraries' publications look just exactly like everybody else's, except they're more prone to have all their money there because there's no reason not to. They are the lucky libraries that only have to do one budget and publish one budget. The rest of you have to figure it out and then lift the piece out that your city or township wants to have. Here's what a capital improvement page looks like. This is Linwood's capital improvement page. The thing about a capital improvement fund for a district is, and for all libraries, if you show a transfer to capital improvement on your budget, you are not obligated to do it if it doesn't work out and you need the money for carryover. If you show on the top that you want to transfer money out of capital improvement into the operating fund so you can use it on other things but buildings, you can do that, and by publishing it allows you to spend the money on salaries and other books. But if you don't need to, you're not obligated to. Capital Improvement Fund has its own special kinds of rules. I think a lot of libraries should have a capital improvement page in the bigger budget, but I'm telling you, most of them do not. And if you don't worry about it. There again, for districts, they have the exact same responsibilities as a city or township. The key there is they're the ones that have to do it. They have to get it published in the newspaper. They have to make sure they wait and have their meeting 10 days later, and they have to give it to the county. And usually that's in an electronic format. So does anybody have any questions about this part of the presentation? Anything I haven't covered that you thought I ought to have talked about yet?
Patty, can you
Yes.
hear me? This is Victoria at Oakley Public.
Okay.
Apparently, we're not being very proactive. We actually wait for the city to publish the mills that we get, and then we work the budget from that. Is that okay? Because that's how we've done it for years, or do we need to switch this around?
Well, that's saying, well, we'll take what you give us and we'll make it work. It's very hard. If they don't tell you what they're thinking they think you need before they publish it, and it really cuts you back, you're too late.
Well, I do know that we have a certain mill levy that we get every year.
Well, you might have a charter ordinance.
We do.
Okay. Now, at the point in time that's not enough dollars, you have to do two things.
Okay.
You have to start talking to them before they, at a certain point, if that ceiling has been the same, some libraries have had the same ceiling for 25 years.
Right.
And at a certain point in time, that starts to be not enough. You really have to lop things off to make that work.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So you need to start having a proactive campaign about, here's the only thing I can do with this money. It's been the same this long. Maybe go back and look at a city budget and say, back at the time this was passed, your budget was only this much.
Okay.
Your budget's grown X percent. We've done the best we can, but we have to have a new ceiling. If they're determined to have a charter ordinance, that's fine. But they need to give you a new ceiling so that you have a number of years you can go before you're smashed flat again.
Okay. So right now we're okay with what we're getting.
Okay.
So do we just wait until we're not okay, or when we see it starting to hit that ceiling? Or do we start now?
Well, I would see if they should have an idea of what a mill is worth in early July. And at the very least, if they could tell you what a mill is worth and how many mills you get, you'll know how much money you have to work with. And at least you could interrupt them before they publish. Once they publish,
yes,
it's too late. I mean,
Okay.
the very likely they're not going to be happy with you if you come in and make them have to republish, because it doubles the cost. So try to work on getting a little more information sooner.
Okay.
I mean, just because once it's too late, it's too late. you know, and
Okay.
you don't want to have to put a sign on the door and said, we're only open one day a week due to the,
Right. Right. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to change.
You had some, excuse me, I'm very
All right.
sorry.
No, it's all right.
You had some very interesting plates up. Is there a way to print those? Just so that, I mean, I've been taking some detailed notes.
Oh yeah, we'll send out the PowerPoint and we'll put it up on Apple.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So remember that your budget has to fit in their budget, and we've kind of been through those kinds of things. It's really key. You think it's annoying, actually, but it's important that you put your budget together for your operation, and then you have to turn your hat sideways a little bit and think about how to lift their piece out and how to talk to them about that piece. So it's helpful if you think of an annual report. It's also, this is the PR branding sort of thing. It's important that you do something like this. You can always key off your mission and vision. It helps you understand why you keep some of the statistics you keep over and above what you have to do for the state report. It's really important to use color and graphs and pictures. I've given you links in here in this PowerPoint, and I checked and they all work. For example, this is from OCLC. It's kind of useful to have something that puts your library service in perspective. That's why I kind of thought these would be nice to look at. Here are some other places to get annual report ideas. A library use calendar is something that, calculator is something you could certainly put up on your website and generates a lot of comment. That's what this looks like. So you can have this on your website and somebody can decide for themselves how much their library is worth to them. You can change the services that you list. In the background, you can input the value of that service, and this is where they would input the number of those or number of times they've done that, and it gives them a calculation. That's a good PR piece. These are all things that indirectly tie to your budget, because the better you can sell what's happening and who it benefits, the better funded you're going to become. This is something I want you to think through. These are facts, and it's pretty dry. It's all true, but dry. What you have to think about when you talk to people is what this says to them. You know, we circulated 52,744 books. Some people will say, and so. The point there is, take those facts and tell a story. You have to put it in a meaningful term for them. So if you say that the Reality Public Library saved $1.3 million, that's based on that circulation stat at $25 a book, which is the average cost for the hardcover book. If you say that the current tax support for the library is $19 per person, that's based on how much the population is and how much tax you get. If you say that that average $19.49 returns almost $435 worth of services, that tells a different story. We often don't think and sell ourselves enough to understand that we work very hard to make a penny go as far as it can. In our budget, a penny is important. In everybody else's budget, it's not. But we are efficient in the use of those tax dollars, and you shouldn't take a backseat to anybody, because you really work very hard to make the taxes you're given perform. This is one of my favorite sayings about budget. So you have to know your stuff. You have to know where your stuff fits into their stuff. Then the important thing is you have to know how your stuff impacts their stuff. What do you do that helps what they do better? And know why your stuff matters to and for the community. If you think about those things and own it, you'll be very, very effective in your budgeting process. Now, I gave homework last time, these two things. And if you have any questions, I didn't really show the timeline here. If you haven't done a timeline, I only suggest you do it for your benefit. You need to know when you need to be planning to do these things. And if your board needs to take an action in May, a final approval, that means they need to start discussing in March and April so they can take an action in May. I have 2 pieces of homework, and don't panic. What I want you to do is go back and review that 2016 budget you put together, which starts with what you've got. This is what is happening in your life today. You have to figure out, the only piece you're going to have to figure out is, am I going to get as much money as I thought? And what does that mean about what I can spend? And how much am I hoping to have in the bank at the end of the year? And then start creating that 2017 budget. And the optional piece of this, which are things I think you need to have, but I'm not going to require you to have for homework. But I wish you'd really seriously look at how to develop a PR piece, an annual report piece on your library. It doesn't have to be all about what happened last year, but how do I develop a branding piece for my library? And then the other thing is create that presentation or handout that you're going to give the city clerk or that you want to give the city. I want you to think about being prepared because the more sure you are and positive you are and strong you are in how you present the information, the less argument you're going to get. If you act like you don't know what you're talking about, you're just going to invite unnecessary questions because it's just, it's like the weak animal in the herd. You're going to have to act like, I know what this money can do for this community. I have stories, I have examples, I have measures, and here's what would benefit everyone in the community. And you really just kind of need to let your board have that passion about the whole thing. I want you to click your heels and go out there and prepare a budget, and blessings on everyone. I really, really have appreciated your participation. I can't tell you how excited I am that you actually are trying to get this done. Yay, team. Again, I want to thank you. And then I will be emailing out this afternoon some forms and other things, and a copy of this presentation. And we'll put it up on the Apple site as well. Does anyone have any questions?
Laura, this is Sarah from Sheridan County. I do. I was just going back to the carryover. So does carryover also include the CD? Like we have a building and equipment CD set up that we just use for building maintenance and equipment maintenance. Excuse me. Does that all go into like the carryover, or is it just what we have in our checking that we pay for bills and all of that?
Well, technically it would be part of your carryover, but I mean, if you're using it for maintenance and not capital purchase. But what I would say is that the anticipated budget expense would be the same then in your budget.
Okay.
So if I'm going to add that to the front end, I'm going to add that as a line in the budget.
Okay.
So that I'm not making, I'm not reducing what I can spend on operation.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, I do. This is Kat from Riley City Library.
Okay.
We have a certain amount of donations.
Uh-huh.
Do we have to qualify that into the carryover also?
Do the people, have they donated for specific things?
No, it's usually just general donations.
Well, in your internal carryover, yes, you would. I should back this up and say, when you're going to, if you go back and look at Osage City and their tax dollars carryover, let me see if I can find that real quick. The point that you need to know is for the city, you need to tell them you don't have any tax money left because everything you spend first is tax dollars. Okay?
Sure.
So internally, when I'm doing my big picture budget for the library, yes, I'm going to show those donations, that money I have in the bank from donations as part of my library stuff because I need to know I have it that I can spend it for library things if I need it. But it's not part of what you get to give your city.
Okay, certainly.
Because if you notice here on Osage City, she's showing that here on general tax dollars, you notice there's a 0. She spent all her tax money. Now, I will tell you, if you have an employee benefit fund, that would be the only fund that would have carryover of tax dollars because tax dollars are the only thing that goes in the employee benefit fund.
Okay.
Okay. So, but I want you to all think of my general fund for when I'm talking to my city or my township, I spend all that money. You gave me X dollars last year and I spent it all. I'm not starting with any tax dollar carryover.
Sure.
Okay.
Otherwise, they may take it away from you. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, smile. It's money, but you have to find the story here so that it doesn't give you a headache, and also so you know what you're doing is worthwhile. Budget planning can be really nerve-wracking. My whole staff takes a wide walk around when I talk loud about money, but you also have to then take a deep breath and realize that it's what makes the stories that happen in your space happen. So go out and enjoy.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and thanks everybody for being so participatory. Questions are fabulous. I'm going to hit stop record.